So this project is about analyzing the effect of a new digital tool that is used to bring property owners into the tax net. And it's in the context of Senegal. It's joint work with Victor, who's here, and Bassirou, who's also at PSE. The motivation for this project stems from the idea that tax revenues in developing countries are considered too low. On average, taxes amount to around 13% of GDP in low-income countries, against on average 23% in OECD countries. The property tax, in theory, should not be that difficult to enforce, thanks to the fact that the tax base is tangible because it's properties. However, in spite of this theoretical facility, we observe that developing countries perform poorly. And in particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, property taxes account for only 2% of total taxes, while this figure is much higher in OECD countries. In our context, the context for this project, which is the region of Dakar in Senegal, so it's the region of the capital city, we found in our baseline results that only 13% of property owners paid the tax in 2018, and that less than 20% of potential revenues were being collected. And this is in spite of the fact that there are some strong decentralization policies, meaning that municipalities need these revenues to deliver public local services. So what we did in this project is that we partnered with the National Senegalese Tax Administration to develop a modernized property tax management system. And this new system is currently being evaluated through a randomized experiment. And the objective of the new system, I'm going to talk about it in more detail, is to digitize most of the steps of the fiscal chain. So I'm going to start by giving a quick overview of the different phases which occurred along the life cycle of the project. So we first started by doing a needs assessment with the administration to identify what were the biggest challenges for the implementation of the property tax. And this helped us to suggest and develop a modernized protocol for property taxation. Then, in collaboration with the administration, we worked with a local IT company based in Dakar to develop the new digital tool, so a new software, which would help implement this new protocol, and I'm going to give a bit more detail about what this software does later on. After that, we collected our baseline data. We also digitized a lot of cadastral data that the administration had, which allowed us to calibrate a formula for property valuation. And currently, the administration is carrying out a property tax census using this new digital tool implemented through an RCT. So that's ongoing. And in a few months, we'll be measuring short and medium-term outcomes using both administrative and survey data. So what are the research questions that we're hoping to address with this project? The first one will be to evaluate the overall impact of the program to measure to what extent the introduction of this new tool allows to increase revenue mobilization. A second question will be addressed using variations in the way the application works. And we're going to be comparing situations where tax officials have discretion in the assessment of the tax liability with a situation where there's a formula, and it's this formula, this rule, which determines the value of the property and so the tax base. So we're going to be comparing a situation with more or less discretion in the work of this administration. A third research question we want to address is trying to assess whether there's some impact of this increased fiscal pressure on taxpayers and citizens regarding their perception of their government, the expectations they have towards local administrations, and accountability. This is called, in this realm of research, the tax bargaining hypothesis. And finally, we're going to try to measure the incidence of the property tax by looking at how the increased fiscal burden is shared between tenants and owners. So the strands of literature this work hopes to contribute to are listed here. I'm not going to go through them in detail. So the first one is about assessing the impact of technological investments for fiscal capacity. The second strand of literature is the one which interrogates the respective advantages of rules versus discretion in the work of administrations. The third one is about the tax bargaining hypothesis that I mentioned just before. And finally, there's a branch of literature trying to assess the incidence of property taxes, and so we're hoping to shed a new light with regard to that question. So a few words now about the institutional context. So this is a map of Senegal, and the region we're working with for now is the region of Dakar, which is colored in orange. In Senegal, all property owners are subject to a tax, which amounts to 5% of the value of their property, and this value is defined as the annual market rental value of the property, meaning how much could be asked by the owner to a tenant if the property was rented at a market price. That's the tax base for the property tax. And so they're supposed to pay 5% of that value as a property tax and an extra 3.6% as a garbage tax. And the National Tax Administration, which is our main partner for this project, is in charge of assessments and updating the valuation roll, so the registry of all taxpayers. Then the National Treasury is the administration distributing the tax notification and receiving the payments. Now, as I said, this system is currently displaying strong dysfunctionings with only around 13% of people who pay. And so the main problem we identified is that most people are not receiving a tax notification. It's not that they're not accepting to pay, it's that most of them are not on the register and they never receive a tax notification. So this is from our survey when we ask people who don't pay why they didn't pay. 86% say that they didn't receive a tax notification. So the program is going to focus on this stage of registering new owners. So how did we build this new tool, and what's the concept of the Modernize program? We focused on 194 cadastral sections within the region. So this is the region of Dakar, the same that was highlighted on the previous map, and each red box is a cadastral section. And we're working with 194 of them spread out in the region. So what's inside a section? Each section looks like this when you zoom into it. It's divided in plots, and each plot has a unique identifier. So this is the cadastral data that we're starting from and that we used as a basis for the new tool and the property tax census. So what happens when the program is implemented? Agents from the administration go out in the field and they have the new application that was developed available on a tablet, as you can see on the picture in the middle. And in the application, there's already included all the cadastral information with the sections and the plots that I showed previously. And basically, they just pick up information for each property on the identity of the owners, the characteristics of the house, the value, etc. Before they go in the field, there are some sensitization campaigns that are done for people to be aware and trust that it's really a government program. And so the banner up there is an example of these sensitization activities. Once this information is captured in the field by the work of the field agents, there's another component of the tool, which is the web-based software available in the office for the tax officials. And in the web-based software, they can visualize all the information that has been collected in the field. So this is an example for one property. They can visualize in the maps what has been already surveyed and not. And they can produce the tax notifications each time the information is validated. There's a third dimension included in this software, is that, as I said, it allows, in some cases, to provide an estimate of the property value based on some characteristics that are picked up in the field. So this is an example of a property. The characteristics, so sorry for it's in French on this example, are, for example, the number of floors, the type of wall, whether there's a terrace or not, the area of the property, and all these characteristics allow within the software to compute a predicted value for the property. So now what's our experimental design? I described the treatment, but as I said, this is implemented under the form of an RCT. So we have a treatment group and a control group to be able to assess its impact. So among the 194 sections I showed you earlier, they were divided in two groups. In the control sections, there's no property tax census. They're just going to be reconducting the tax notifications they already had in their system. And the new program, so everything I showed with the new tool, is happening in the 97 treated sections. Now, within these treated sections, they're divided into 2 treatment branches. In 49 sections, we are going to be testing the formula, the property valuation formula I just showed you, while in the other sections, the valuation is going to be done through the discretionary way, which is their current way they do. So basically, we're going to be comparing the current valuation system with this new rule-based valuation system. And so this is just a graph to recap the process, the intervention process. So in the control areas, which are pictured on the bottom arrow, we just conducted our baseline survey. Then they're going to be distributing the tax notifications from the old system, and we'll conduct our end-line survey. In the treated sections, there's the sensitizations, which are carried out with, for example, the banner I showed, then the fiscal census carried out with the tablet for each property, and then the distribution of the new tax notifications. So what are the outcomes that we're going to be interested in measuring? So as I said, these are going to be measured using both administrative and survey data. In terms of fiscal outcomes, we're going to be measuring the impact on tax assessments, so by how much assessments are increased when this effort is deployed by the administration, and how much it increases revenues, because it's possible that like some people might not pay the full amount that they're asked to pay. A lot of these owners will be receiving a tax notification for the first time, so there's obviously a compliance issue, so we're going to try to look at that as well. Ideally, we would like to try to net out the cost benefit of the program. So we know the cost of the new tool, and we would like to measure after how many years, thanks to this fieldwork and the new database that's generated, will this cost be broken even. Now, when comparing the rule versus discretionary assessment methods, we have some hypotheses that we're going to be testing, but we're still refining them. We expect that the formula-based assessment might produce values, property values, which are closer to the market values, so more accurate in one sense. But on the other hand, when agents have the discretion to set the value in the field, they might be aligning values more closely with what they perceive as being owners' capacity to pay. And this kind of bias is something that we think could be interesting to measure. We're also expecting that there might be differential corruption depending on the type of assessment, and this will be measured using survey data. And finally, for the 2 other types of outcomes that I mentioned in the introduction, in terms of local governance dynamics, so this is also going to be measured using survey data, and we're going to be interested in the frequency and topics of interactions that taxpayers have with the local administrations. And these local administrations are both the municipalities, but also at a much smaller level, neighborhood delegates, which used to be called neighborhood chiefs, which are really the first level of administrative representativeness in the region of Dakar. And so we are going to be asking what kind of topics are discussed, because we think that when there's an increase in taxation, these topics might change. And taxpayers may have higher expectations, higher demands. In terms of rental market and the tax incidence, this is also going to be measured using survey data. Because this rental market is particularly poorly regulated, we expect owners to have a lot of room for changing their rents very rapidly, and so we're going to try to capture this in our survey. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Hello, thank you. It was very interesting. I have one precise question: is how do you know the taxpayers are not lying when they say they did not receive the message from the fiscal administration?
So it could be that many are lying, that I can't prove for sure. This is the result from the survey, but when we use our administrative data, I didn't show these figures here, we also see that they basically have very few properties in their tax register compared to the number of plots that exist in the cadastral data. So we think that the orders of magnitude also make sense.
A little out of the box, but down the road, someone may be thinking about using the blockchain technology because it's a perfect application for real estate transaction, because it gives full transparency of all the transactions that happen and the follow-up. So it's a registered, and it's make sure that down the road you'll have nobody could lie, because all the transactions are registered on this complete platform. I know it's not easy to do maybe in this country, but the technology exists and there are applications about real estate transactions. Some countries have adopted that. You may want to look at that further down the road.
Yes, thank you. Which countries are you thinking about? I'm not familiar with the
Okay,
blockchain.
well, we can talk later.
Yes, sure, I'll be
but
happy
if you
to
go on
hear.
the internet, blockchain and real estate, you'll find a lot of
Okay.
application. Okay.
Thank you. Maybe for next stage of the project in Senegal.
Could you talk a little bit more about the bias you were mentioning of the administrative people evaluating the taxpayers' ability to pay?
So normally the property tax is a tax on wealth, meaning whatever you're earning every month, because you have this house which the value is X, you have to pay the same amount every year. It should not depend on your income in theory. But what I observe when we go in the field with these agents, when we do field work with them, in some cases they say, oh, this person looks very old, I'm sure he doesn't receive his pension, so let's just put a lower value. This is things that we observe on an anecdotal basis, and so we think that this kind of biases must be maybe playing a role.
You talk about corruption, and you say my bias also the value of real estate. But will the administrator accept to have this software if they can have some benefit from corruption?
So that's a good question, because it's something we were afraid of at the onset, because when you introduce a new technological tools, obviously you're changing people's habits, and so you might have some people who are reluctant. For now, we're not observing this. They're really enthusiastic about the software, but for now, even with the software, they can still be asking someone, oh, if you give me 20,000 francs, I can lower the value. This, I'm not observing it directly, but they still have some leeway, even with the new software. So for now, I don't know yet what's happening, but even with the new tool, there could still be corruption. We might need to, I don't know. 1 minute, okay.
Yeah, do the agents know the formula you created, and could it not bias their behavior? For example, if they imagine that if their action gives higher tax benefits, and if that's the case, the administration will not implement the formula. They could bias their behavior in the sense of during a short period of the time of your evaluation, showing a higher value of properties.
So for now, the agents in the field, they're not really aware of the formula. We're just presenting it because the characteristics, they had to pick them up before when they were doing their paper-based census. So there's not a big change in terms of what they're picking up. It's not explicit for them that there's a formula being calculated with it. So this, I think, will have more evidence on how their understanding evolves throughout the months of the program. Okay, thank you very much.